She stood frozen in the hallway, clutching her stomach, tears sliding down her cheeks. Behind her, the billionaire's wife was screaming, not out of shock, but betrayal. Her voice echoed through the mansion walls, shaking everything Ruth thought she had left. "You've been sleeping with my husband?" the woman shouted, eyes wild. Ruth couldn't answer, because the truth was worse. Much worse. Guys, welcome to this new episode, and if you love your mom, please subscribe now, and also comment where you're watching from. Let's begin. Ruth was 25, soft-spoken, and from a small village on the outskirts of Enugu. Life had not been kind to her. Her mother, who once sold roasted plantains in the market, had fallen seriously ill. Hospital bills were piling up, so when Ruth got a chance to work as a housemaid in Lekki, for one of the wealthiest families in Lagos, she said yes without thinking twice. She believed it was just a job, nothing more. But nothing inside that mansion was ever simple. From her very first day, Ruth noticed how everyone walked like they were being watched. The house was silent, too silent for a place so full of wealth. Mrs. Alhaja, the wife, was elegant but cold. Her eyes scanned Ruth like a snake watching prey. But it was Mr. Desmond, the billionaire himself, who made Ruth uncomfortable, the most. He always smiled at her for too long, always called her into his study alone. And one day, he gave her a brand new iPhone and some cash. "Just in case you need something," he said. Ruth tried to refuse, but the way he looked at her made her feel powerless. That was the day she should have walked away, but she didn't. And that was the beginning of her quiet fall. He leaned back in his leather chair, slowly sipping a glass of red wine, eyes fixed on Ruth as she nervously cleaned the edge of his table. "Do you know how beautiful you are?" he asked. She froze. Her hands shook slightly, but she forced a smile. Deep down, she already knew. This was not just about work anymore. Ruth tried to keep her distance after the phone and cash incident, but Desmond only grew bolder. He started calling her into his study more often, always alone. Sometimes he'd ask about her family, and other times he'd just sit and stare as she cleaned around him. She didn't know what to make of it, but something felt wrong. The look in his eyes was no longer casual. It was deep, intense, almost hungry. Mrs. Alhaja didn't notice. Or maybe she did, but chose not to speak. Ruth heard rumors from the other staff that Mr. Desmond had done this before, hired young girls, given them gifts, then tossed them out quietly when his wife found out. But Ruth had no choice. Her mother needed medication. Her siblings were starving. She couldn't afford to leave. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, Desmond called Ruth into the lounge. He said he needed help reviewing documents, but the only thing on the table was a box of jewelry. "Pick one," he said softly. Ruth hesitated. "I can't, sir." But Desmond smiled. "You already have," he whispered, brushing a strand of her hair behind her ear. Ruth felt her breath catch. This was no longer a guessing game. She knew exactly what was happening. And yet, part of her felt stuck, like the mansions. Silence had trapped her, too. Ruth lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She wasn't sure how it happened. One minute she was saying no, the next she was in his arms, lost in confusion and fear. Desmond hadn't forced her. Not exactly, but the way he looked at her, the way he spoke like she owed him something, left her cornered. That night changed everything. The next morning, she couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Her steps felt heavier and her chest tighter. She tried to go about her duties, scrubbing the floors and folding bed sheets, but her hands kept trembling. What had she done? Why did she feel so ashamed? To her surprise, Desmond acted like nothing happened. He greeted her with a soft smile, handed her another bundle of cash, and told her she was doing very well. That was it. No talks, no guilt, just silence and rewards. Days turned into weeks, and it didn't stop. Every few nights, he would call her again. He always had something for her, a wristwatch, a designer bag, a new phone, and every time she tried to avoid him, he reminded her gently of how far she had come. "You're not a village girl anymore," he would say. "You're part of this home now." But Ruth didn't feel like part of anything. She felt used. And worse, she was starting to believe this was normal. Something she had to endure to survive. She didn't even tell her mother during their calls. How could she? She was supposed to be making them proud, not hiding in shame. She didn't know it yet, but the storm had only just begun. One sunny afternoon, Ruth was scrubbing the marble steps at the front of the house when a soft voice called her name. She looked up and saw Daniel, the billionaire's only son, standing by the door with a bottle of cold water in his hand. He looked nothing like his father. While Desmond was sharp, firm, and commanding, Daniel looked gentle, warm, and kind. "You look tired," he said, offering her the drink. Ruth hesitated, then took it with a shy nod. That simple gesture was the beginning of something she didn't expect. Over the following weeks, Daniel started talking to her more. He asked her about her village, her dreams, her favorite music. Sometimes he even helped her carry laundry baskets or sneak extra food to the kitchen for her to take home. Unlike his father, Daniel never made her feel like she owed him anything. He listened when she spoke. He laughed at her jokes. And slowly, Ruth found herself smiling again, real smiles. She tried to stay distant, knowing her situation was already complicated. But Daniel was different. He didn't see her as just a maid, and that was what scared her the most. Ruth didn't know how Daniel found out she liked watching sunsets, but one evening he asked her to follow him to the rooftop terrace. It overlooked the entire estate, golden skies blending with the Lekki skyline. She had never seen something so peaceful. They sat in silence for a while before Daniel spoke. "You don't talk much, but I see things. You're sad and you're scared." Ruth's eyes welled up, but she quickly wiped them. "I'm fine," she whispered. "No, you're not," he replied. "But you don't have to tell me why." That night, Ruth felt something shift. She had carried so much pain alone, and suddenly someone else was helping her hold it. Daniel didn't ask questions. He didn't push. He just sat beside her as the sky turned purple. After that, their bond grew stronger. Daniel would leave books on her bed. He'd make her laugh in the kitchen. She started looking forward to their moments together more than anything else in the house. But Ruth was living a double life. She was caught between two men, father and son, and neither knew the truth. The weight of her secret was becoming too much to bear. The night was quiet. Everyone had gone to bed, and the mansion felt hollow. Ruth was in the laundry room folding clothes when Daniel walked in. He had a tired look on his face, eyes softer than usual. "Can I sit?" he asked. She nodded. They talked for a while. Nothing serious, just random stories from the village, jokes and whispers. But something in the air shifted. Daniel leaned closer. "You don't deserve whatever is hurting you, Ruth," he said gently. Before she could reply, his hand touched hers. Their eyes met, and then they kissed. It was slow, unsure, but it happened. Ruth didn't stop it. She didn't want to. But deep inside, panic was rising. She was already bound to his father in secret, and now here she was, falling into something else with Daniel. She pulled away and stood up quickly. "I need to go," she said. Her voice was shaky. Daniel didn't stop her. He only looked at her with concern. That night, Ruth cried herself to sleep. Not because she didn't feel something for Daniel, but because she knew this would destroy everything. She just didn't know how soon that destruction would begin. Weeks passed, but Ruth's guilt only grew heavier. She continued serving. Breakfast with trembling hands, folding sheets with shaking fingers, and avoiding both Desmond and Daniel whenever she could. But deep down, she knew something was off. Her body felt strange. Her mornings were marked by dizziness and strong. Smells made her stomach turn. One morning, while cleaning the guest bathroom, Ruth quietly took out a small white box she had hidden in her apron. It was a pregnancy test. She had bought it secretly during a market run. Her hands shook as she followed the instructions. Then, she waited. The result came back in minutes. Positive. Ruth sat on the bathroom floor, numb. She wasn't sure if she wanted to cry or scream. This was no longer a private mistake. This was real. A baby was growing inside her, and she had no idea who the father was. She buried the test under a pile of trash and walked out of the bathroom as if nothing had happened. But inside her, the world was collapsing. The next day, as Ruth was helping the cook prepare lunch, she overheard something chilling. 2 staff members were whispering near the sink. "I saw her sneaking out of the boss's room again," one of them said. "Haven't you noticed her stomach? She's not just putting on weight. Something's up." Ruth froze. She knew she couldn't hide the changes in her body forever. Her uniform was tighter. Her steps were slower. The mansion's silence had turned into whispers. Later that evening, Mrs. Al-Haja asked to see her in private. Ruth entered the sitting room with her heart pounding. The madam looked her up and down, then folded her arms. "Are you pregnant?" she asked plainly. Ruth opened her mouth, but nothing came out. "I'm asking you a question," the woman repeated. "Who is responsible?" Ruth remained silent. She couldn't speak. She couldn't lie. But the truth was worse than anything she could imagine. Mrs. Al-Haja's face turned cold. "I will find out. And when I do, God help you." The house exploded in chaos. Mrs. Al-Haja called a family meeting. Desmond and Daniel were both present, sitting stiffly on opposite ends of the living room. Ruth was made to stand in the middle, her head bowed, trembling. "I want to know who put this girl in this condition," the wife said, her voice shaking with rage. "Because someone under this roof has turned our home into a disgrace." Before Ruth could say a word, Desmond stood up. "I'll handle this," he said calmly. "Everyone out." But Daniel didn't move. He stared at his father, then looked at Ruth. "Handle what exactly?" he asked. His voice was cold, flat. "Why is she scared of you?" The silence was heavy. Ruth looked up at both men, and that's when the truth started to crack open. "I'm asking again," Daniel said, this time louder. "Did you touch her?" Desmond didn't answer. Ruth's lips parted, and in a whisper that changed everything, she said, "It wasn't just him." Everyone froze. Desmond's eyes widened. Daniel stood up slowly. "What do you mean?" he asked. Ruth clutched her belly. "I don't know whose child this is." The house fell into silence after Ruth's confession. For days, no one spoke to her. The other staff avoided her. Desmond moved into the guest wing. Daniel stopped eating dinner at home. Mrs. Al-Haja locked herself in her room, her eyes swollen from crying. Ruth didn't ask for sympathy. She spent her nights in tears and her days sweeping the same corners over and over, trying to disappear. But she knew something had to be done. The baby was growing. The truth had to be faced. Desmond was the first to suggest it. A DNA test. "We'll settle this like adults," he said coldly. Daniel agreed, though he wouldn't look Ruth in the eye. 2 weeks later, Ruth was taken to a private hospital. Samples were collected from both father and son. The waiting period felt like a lifetime. Ruth stayed quiet through it all. She had no defense. She didn't even know what she hoped the result would say. She just wanted peace. The envelope was thick, sealed, heavy with answers. The whole family sat in the living room again: Desmond, Daniel, Alhaja, and Ruth. A lawyer handed the paper to Desmond. He opened it slowly, read it, folded it again. He didn't speak. His eyes were blank. Then he handed it to his wife. She read it, gasped, and dropped it on the floor. Daniel picked it up. His hands shook. After reading it, he stood, silent, for a long time. Then he looked at Ruth with a face that didn't show anger, only pain. "It's mine," he said softly. "The baby is mine." Desmond looked stunned, not because of the result, but because Daniel wasn't surprised. "You knew?" he asked. Daniel nodded. "I loved her. You used her. That's the difference." Ruth felt tears slip down her face, not from fear anymore, but from release. For the first time, the truth was out. But it didn't bring peace. It brought distance. Desmond left the house that night, and the silence that followed was deeper than ever before. Weeks passed. The tension in the house faded, but the wounds remained. Ruth moved to a small apartment nearby, still working part-time, but no longer living under the family's roof. She chose quiet, healing, space to think. Daniel visited often. He helped her to the clinic, brought food, stayed by her, sighed when the nausea hit hard. But Ruth didn't rush into any promises. Too much had happened. Too many lines had been crossed. Mrs. Alhaja eventually spoke to her, not kindly, but not cruelly either. "You hurt this family," she said, "but maybe we hurt ourselves first." The day Ruth gave birth, Daniel was there. It was a baby. Girl, quiet, wide-eyed, with tiny fingers that wrapped around Daniel's pinky like a promise. Looking at the child, Ruth didn't think of guilt anymore. She thought of new beginnings. She didn't know what the future would look like, but for the first time, she was not afraid. She had survived the mansion, the secrets, the shame. And now, she had something no one could take from her. Her voice, her truth, and a child born out of pain, but raised in hope.